Thank you very much, and thank you so much for inviting me to Barcelona, particularly as I live in Yorkshire in England, and we still have snow at the moment. So it's delightful to come out without my gloves and my scarf and my hat and everything like that. I'm going to start by just telling you a little bit about myself. I am a jack of all trades. I don't work for an organisation. I don't have a big title or a big building or anything like that. I position myself as a communicator around diversity in the arts within the UK, but also increasingly in other places too. I work on a consultancy base with organisations. I'm a critic of work. I critique work. I curate work. I bring work together and place it in particular combinations in particular places. And at the ripe old age of 46, last year I started to actually create work. It took me a long time to get there. The other thing you need to know about me is that I'm deaf. I lost my hearing at the age of maybe about 12, 13. They're not sure because first they thought I was ignoring everybody and that it was about a problem with authority. But then they found out it was because I couldn't hear them. So I'm severely deaf. I now wear a hearing aid, not in my ears. I have an implant in my head that I use. So I was hearing and then I was severely deaf. And now with my implant, I am half hearing, half deaf. For me, this is the perfect place to be because I have all the advantages of being able to hear some things and all the advantages of being deaf. I don't hear my husband snore at night when he's asleep. This is marvellous. And I can win every argument simply because I switch myself off when I've said the last word. So there are distinct advantages, I think. What I'm going to talk about is some of the work that's been coming up around the UK over the last year or so. Because of the work that I do, it means I get to see a massive amount of work, which is fantastic. So I'll be talking about lots of different people's work today. And I'll be referring to and showing some very short films that I made last year. I said I started to make work last year. It wasn't because I wanted to become a filmmaker. It was because there was an opportunity to capture some work. And I felt that if it wasn't captured, and if it wasn't captured in a particular way, the legacy of that work could go, or the impact of that work couldn't be as strong as it could be. So I really wanted to get involved in capturing that. And we needed to do it through film, so I suddenly had to roll up my sleeves and become a producer for film work. And I was very lucky to manage to get quite a large sum of money to be able to do that. And the films that I show today are part of a bigger collection of films that are all available online on the internet at a place called The Space, which is the BBC and the Arts Council of England came together to create a platform on which to put work. So they're all on there. The other thing I do, or the other thing I'm doing for this year, which links in today, is I've set up a little project for myself to do one thing different each day. I thought if I was saying to people that difference was delicious and it didn't have to be a problem, it didn't have to be problematized, then I really should live that for myself. So every day I do something that I've not done before. It's only March, but I've kept up so far. Yesterday at the airport, I had to go through a number of airports, and I did no escalators, no lifts, no travelators. I walked everywhere. I was very tired, therefore, when I got here. One of the things that I've done is I had my nose pierced. I've had my nose pierced. I wanted to have my nose pierced at 16, over 30 years ago. It took me 30 years to pluck up the courage to have it done because I was worried about what people would think. I was worried that people would think of me differently. And I suddenly thought, hang on, if I'm saying that difference is a good thing, then I need to be stronger in my own convictions. So I got my nose pierced, it's great. My mother hates it. My mother is very sad. My mother, it obviously must be similar to the stereotypes around Russians. My mother now thinks I'm a prostitute. I think at 46 I'd have to be trying quite hard. But there we go. So my business card says that I think difference is delicious and not divergent, and that's hopefully what I'll try and show to you today. So what do I think the benefits of difference are? Why is it a good thing? I think it's about fairness and equality. I think it's about representation. We need to represent the whole world to the whole world, not just a subset of people who fulfill particular characteristics. I think that there's an international trend, certainly within the UK, certainly within Europe, and also further afield, where difference is seen as interesting. We're fed up of seeing the same thing again and again and again and again. It becomes boring, it becomes dull. So we are starting to have a greater appreciation for difference. But the more we see, the more different we are, the easier it is to see our commonalities, to see what we all have in common, to see what is universal. But for me, this last one is the most interesting. I think work that is different, particularly artwork that is different, performance that is different, is actually more compelling. I think it's fresher. I think it's telling us something that we haven't seen before, and I'm really interested in that. And so, for me, it gives us something new. It's not a deficit, a problem. It's something that actually is of equal and more validity because it has something to say to everybody. So for me, when you look at a piece of work created by a group, an individual, someone who has a different perspective from you, it all depends on the lens through which you see it. How do you choose to interpret that work? What do you see when you see that work? And I think all of us have a real role to play in how we shape those lenses, in how we construct a frame through which we see work. And I want to talk first about a particular piece that was at the Unlimited Festival last year, and I know a number of people saw it. It's called Private Dancer, and it's curated by an artist called Janice Parker. And what it is it's a physical installation of 5 different rooms. And the performance happens in those rooms and also outside of them. What you do as an audience member is you have you're processed in, you hear a little bit about the location, about how the performance is going to work. You start moving around this structure. And then you suddenly, out of the corner of your eye, realise that some of the people you thought were in the audience with you, that have been queuing with you, that you've been chatting with, are actually in the performance too. So that's the first thing, you're slightly unnerved. And then in the rooms, at different points, dancers dance, and you can see through peepholes, you can see the shadows on the walls, but also you could be invited in. You could be invited in by the dancer themselves into the room to sit down and watch one-on-one. One person watching, one person dancing. You don't have your friends with you. You don't have that disconnect between a stage and the audience. You're just involved in a very intimate performance. You can't help but see the humanity, the realness, the connection you have with the dancer. And all the dancers within the rooms are disabled dancers who are moving in accordance with their own aesthetic. So I'm going to show you one of these short films that I made. It's only 90 seconds. They're very short, so don't blink because you'll miss it. Okay, so this is Private Dancer.
It is something that I think I've gone too far this time. Performers never cease to amaze me. The quality of their work, the amount they give, just burst with pride at them all. I think they're extraordinary. The audience response has been quite overwhelming, over and over and over again, by what they've seen, by the authenticity of it, by the generosity of people, by the utter beauty of watching a disabled person's aesthetic, a disabled person's quality of movement, and finding it profoundly beautiful. And I think they never expect to feel that. They want to feel it, but I don't think they expect to feel it. It makes me really excited, but it also makes me really frustrated, because I think, why is it not more like this? Why is there not more opportunity for them to be seen as who they are without any compromise?
So Private Dancer really split the audiences. Many people absolutely adored it. I absolutely adored it. I think it's one of my favourite pieces I've seen for a very long time. But some people really didn't like it. They found it very uncomfortable. They didn't like the one-to-one approach. They didn't find the dance element to their aesthetic. And I really think it started to bring up a discussion and debate about what is quality, and what is quality to each person in an audience. What is quality in relation to a piece? So I think framing an intention is really important when we talk about quality. And I think the way in which that piece was framed and the intention behind it gave that piece a real quality. Even the people who didn't like what they saw, didn't like the involvement, could understand the nature of the piece and why it was done in the way that it was done. I think context is really important to quality. Where you place a piece of work, who the audience is for a piece of work, what work you put in front of what audience, I think is really critical. The timing and the development of a piece, I think, is really important to the quality of it. Obviously, it must have appropriate resources, and they may be time, they also may be money, they also may be people, they also may be skills. For me and the world I come from, it's really important that the inclusive practice, the way in which people are respected and held within a piece and within the process of creating a piece, is also really important. We talk about the social model of disability, a way of understanding disability that looks at the barriers that society creates as being the disabling factor, not your impairment. So for me, I'm not disabled by the fact that I can't hear. That's just a fact. I can't hear well. What stops me is a lack of subtitles, a lack of sign language interpreters, a lack of equipment. What stops me most is my batteries running out, which they do quite often. And in England, we've started to articulate, through the Arts Council of England, something called the creative case approach, which is where we stop looking simply at the barriers and the problems, and instead we look at what is unique about this work. What does it give to the whole of the arts sector? So that it's not about playing catch-up, it's not about disabled people or other disenfranchised groups trying to catch up with other groups, but it's about saying, actually, let's stop that. Let's instead say, what does this group have? What does this artist have that is unique, that is different, that actually gives us all something? So it's turning the lens the other way round and making us look at it again and see something different. For me, quality isn't about making assumptions about work. We have in England still a pervading assumption that the work of disabled artists will be a little bit rubbish. It will be a little bit not good. It won't be as good as something else. Now, if you come with that lens, if you wear that like a pair of glasses, whatever you see will not be good. Because in your head, you've already made that choice. You've already made that decision. So how do we get rid of that? How do we take that lens away? For me, quality isn't about technique. I can watch something that's technically perfect, but if it doesn't move me, if it doesn't touch me, then for me it doesn't work as art. For me, art is about connection, it's about emotion, it's about making me see something I haven't seen before. For me, quality isn't about training. I think training is really important, don't get me wrong, and access to training is really critical. But for me, you can have quality with untrained performers, if you look at what they can bring uniquely to a piece. Quality for me isn't about a type of person, it's not about trying to be something that you're not. For me, quality isn't about charity. It's not about raising money. That, for me, in an arts context, again, it puts on a pair of glasses for a piece that don't fit. If you go around with a bucket collecting money for the poor people on stage, then what are you saying about the work that they make? What are you saying about the quality of the work? And for me, it's not about size or stature. Individual artists, small companies, are as capable of producing quality as large companies, in my view. But sometimes we can gain a great deal by that relationship with a larger company, or with a larger organisation, or with a larger platform. We can gain impact, we can gain audience, we can gain visibility. Last year, as part of the celebrations for the Olympics, it was the first time that homeless people had ever taken part in the cultural programme associated with the Olympics in any country. And Streetwise Opera took over the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden. But they made a really good decision. They were in partnership with this large opera organisation. But they said, we don't want to use your stage. If we put our people, our choirs and our drama groups of homeless people on your stage, any audience is going to have an expectation that they're at the same level as everybody else who goes on that stage, that they've had the same training, they've trained for 5-6 years, that their voices are of that quality, that's not the lens, that's not the glasses we want people to look at this work through. So what they did was they took over the open space. They created a new stage by the bar in a huge space within the Royal Opera House. And they also said, who is the audience for this? We want a mixed audience. If it's just the people who come to the Opera House, usually, then their understanding of what they see will be different. We want half the audience to be homeless people. We want half the audience to be made up of the groups and their friends and their contacts. And we don't want people to be separated. We don't want opera goers here and homeless people here. We want tables and we want people to mix. And that was interesting. That was to some extent less successful. It was very difficult to mix the audience around. There were different things happening in different places. So you had freedom to go where you want, but it was quite interesting how it worked. And I don't think they were entirely successful in doing that. There was also a big discussion about whether or not to serve alcohol, because alcohol is one of the root causes or one of the linked factors for homelessness. Do you serve alcohol at that kind of an event? For an opera-going audience, it appears to be an essential part of their evening. So there was a big debate about whether or not that should be served. And it was served, but it was served in different ways, in different quantities, and from different places. So it wasn't as all-pervasive as perhaps it could be. So I think you can make bridges with the large organisations, but they have to be on the terms of the work. They have to work for the aesthetic of the piece. It's not just about following a mainstream or a larger organisation's desire. It's about having some currency in that debate too. I want to talk about the work of another dancer called Claire Cunningham. She was another artist who had always made quite small work. She makes work on herself. She's a dancer who uses crutches. And she's always been quite limited in audience reach. And last year, because of the Olympics, she was able to make a much bigger show, a much larger piece that actually was on one of the main stages in London. It's now, at the moment, she's just gone over to Qatar to perform it, and she's now performing it internationally. So it was a breakthrough piece for her. It enabled her to be seen by a much wider audience than she was ever seen by before. So I'll just show you her little 90-second piece, which will give you a flavour of her work.
Sometimes I feel like a machine. I forget I was made to touch skin, to feel heat, breath, to have someone's smile pressed into my neck. I wasn't made to click, not with you, or you, or you, but with you, I click, and you, I click, we click, like a clique, a trio. Hommage à toi.
So she took something that was very distinctive to her, how she moves, the crutches that she used, and she used them thematically within a piece. So the piece, Ménage à Trois, is about the fact that she already has a relationship with two crutches, and somehow that stops her having a relationship with other people. It stops her from getting a partner. So the piece was very specific, but at its heart, it was actually very universal. It was about how any of us find love, how the stereotypes that we have about ourselves, the images that we project onto other people. So it's that thing about by going very into something that's very personal and different, she was able to create a metaphor that everybody could understand and that wide audiences could understand. And she has quite a formalized technique. When she began to work with her crutches, she took a year and a half out to formalize a technique around using them, to work out what, if you did this within a dance framework, a standard dance framework, what would you do with crutches? What would elevation be? What would a stretch be? What would on point be? So she really worked to maximize the stretch of those. Another artist who can't necessarily do that is Jez Colborne. Jez Colborne has learning disabilities. He has Williams syndrome. So he lives in sheltered accommodation. He can't manage money. He would forget to eat or wash. He needs support with daily activities. But he's a great musician. And just because he has those impairments, it shouldn't stop him being a musician, obviously. We know that. But also, it gives him something more. It gives him a fascination with certain pieces of electronic equipment. Jez is fascinated by sirens. Air raid sirens, storm sirens, little sirens, enormous sirens. He will spend hours and hours and hours on the internet mimicking, watching different sirens. The same attention I would give to shopping for new boots, he would give to sirens. He's utterly obsessed by them. And so, again, from that creative case principle, what can you use that's different? What can you use to make difference exciting? last year he created a song, in fact a series of songs, a performance based around sirens called Irresistible, taking the Odysseus myth of the sirens and the rocks. So I'll just show you his film.
Drums, yo.
There's a strangeness about them. You know, they're haunting, they're scary, but they're like an instrument. I, as a young kid, used to really hate sirens. We had a fire station and it had a siren that would go off every day and every night. Well, one day the damn thing went off and I screamed and I screamed. I hated it. But then this weird thing came over me, you know, and I thought, wait a minute, yes, they're scary, but they have that strange, eerie musical feel about them. Because if you really listen, it's not just one tone you can hear from them, it's hundreds of tones.
It's the sound of the sirens. Ooh, ooh, ooh.
So getting Jez involved in music isn't simply about making him become a musician like everyone else. It's about finding what makes him a better musician, what makes him a distinct musician, what makes him an exceptional musician. He can hear things that other people can't. He can certainly hear things I can't hear, but he can hear things that most people can't hear. He hears music in things that most people don't hear music in. We can use that lens. He can help us by framing his work in a certain way. He can help all of us hear something that we don't usually attend to. And I think that's really important. So all of these commissions were part of Unlimited last year, and I know there were a number of people from Spain who came over to Unlimited. Unlimited was a commissions programme, and it was held at the South Bank. A festival of the work was held at the South Bank. So I'll just tell you a little bit about that, because the journey of how Unlimited happened is quite interesting. So it ended up with 29 major commissions from disabled artists. Over 300 applications were received in order to get down to 29 actual commissions. So a huge volume of work had a potential to be made. The whole journey took 12 years from conception to last year. It formed a major part of the bid to be an Olympic city. So it was in the planning on a policy level right from the very, very start. And it took 12 years to build the expectation in order to get those 300 applications, in order to get those 29 commissions. If it had been a shorter period of time, we may have had 50 applications. We may have had 10 commissions. But it took a long time to really build the infrastructure and the expectation that disabled people could create work that was suitable for not just a national platform, but an international one. It was about collaborations. It was about all of the UK collaborating, but also training agencies and mainstream promoters. It was a huge collaborative effort, and everybody had to buy in. Everybody had to understand the importance of what was being done and why. Each commission came with the funds to realise that work, but also additional funds for mentoring and talent development. There was an understanding that if you stretch an artist, if you get them to do something bigger, different, something they've never done before, you need to support them in that process. And I worked as a mentor with a couple of artists, which was fantastic, getting them to look at the implications of taking their work to the next scale. It was about creating a platform for work that we'd never had before. Most of the artists who performed at the South Bank Centre, a major venue in London, had never performed in London before. Usually, venues are quite reticent about booking work. They don't like to book the work. There's a distaste or a discomfort about booking the work quite often. But Unlimited said, no, we have developed this work for a long, long time. This work is of good quality. This work is for wide audiences. And so it started, presenting that platform really helped. And it was about promoters, individual promoters. Claire Cunningham, that you saw, worked with the National Theatre of Scotland. So a major, major organisation worked alongside her to create her piece. All of the collaborators were actually quite disappointed in the way that some other venues and some other promoters didn't take the work to other places as well. So Unlimited is continuing next year. £1.5 million is going into a programme of 3 years to create more work by disabled artists within the UK. Now, for us in the UK, at a time when there's no money around, this is a huge commitment. It's a huge validation of the work that people do. But the key is the work has to tour to more places. More partnerships and more promoters have to get involved in the work. In cities, in towns, theatres, venues, programmers, curators have to engage with the work in order for you to get a grant. So you have to do that work and make those connections. The work has to tour. It can't just be for 1 or 2 performances. It has to be for 20, 30 performances. And that's seen as really important in changing not just the culture of the arts in London, but the culture and the arts across the whole of the UK. So Unlimited was enormous. It was a collaboration of over 50 partners. But it doesn't mean that this work can only be done by enormous collaborations. Scottish Dance Theatre are a mainstream contemporary dance organisation, dance company, based in Dundee. They came to a conference very like this 8-9 years ago. I know because I spoke at that conference, and one of the things that I said to everybody in the audience was diversity in the arts, disabled dancers in the arts, disabled performers. It's not just for specialist companies, it's for everyone. And I asked a question, what are you going to do? What are you going to do when you leave this room? What are you going to do that will make a difference? And the artistic director of Scottish Dance Theatre, it took her 4 years to answer that question. It took her 4 years of thinking before she was ready to do something. Thinking and reading and meeting people. And then she created one piece of work, which is in the top corner, called Angels of Incidents, which Adam Benjamin choreographed with the company. And she saw that process, and then she went, I don't need Adam Benjamin to choreograph this. Choreographing this work is the same as choreographing any work. It's just choreographing dancers. So she then choreographed pieces for the company and brought disabled dancers in. She brought in a dancer called Caroline Bowditch, who worked with the company for 4 years. And then Caroline herself, who's at the end of the top picture, another disabled dancer called Mark Brew, and Janet Smith, together, the 3 of them choreographed a major work for their touring programme. Janet Smith then left the company. She's gone to run a training organisation. And there was a real concern about what would the company keep on with this ethos of accessibility and diversity, or would they stop? And Caroline also had left at that point. And we're really pleased that they've now taken Claire Cunningham, another Scottish dancer you saw earlier. She's now one of their associate artists. So they've chosen, even though the person has gone, the company as a whole has chosen to keep that focus. But 8 years from start to that, being part of the ethos, part of their values, part of their delivery for a mainstream company. But it can also be individuals. It doesn't have to be companies. Individuals can achieve a huge amount. In the middle there's an individual artist called Sue Austin, who's a wheelchair user. She has ME. She can work for 2 hours a day, that's all. She has chronic fatigue. She gets extremely tired. But Sue sees herself like, if she has to come up with we asked her to talk about a metaphor, something that would help her and help others understand how she works. And she says she's a match. She strikes and she blazes, but she needs to put that match on wood, on paper, to other people in order to start a fire. But she can be the catalyst for that. Her 2 hours a day, she can make things happen. She can start things off. She can have an idea and make something happen. And she had this idea about using her wheelchair. She said, wheelchair is used as a symbol of limitation. But for me, it's my symbol of freedom. Why does nobody get that? Why does everybody see it as a limiting, something that to feel sorry for, something? Why do we have that view? She said, for me, it's freedom. It's a way of exploring the world. It's something, I want to create something that really shows that. So she's actually now over in Egypt again, diving in her chair. I'll show you her little piece.
The focus of the project has shifted from being about transforming preconceptions about the wheelchair to a more global perspective that we all have issues to transcend. To give people a sense, if you can do that, I can do anything. I'm hoping for other people is it'll push them outside the box, because the whole project is completely outside of the box. People said it wasn't possible. We've just worked away, and with the amazing team that I have around me, I'm arguing the wheelchair is a portal that pushes me through into a new level of awareness. Pushing through conceptually, physically, emotionally. Yes.
Sue is an academic. She's done a PhD on the impact of the kind of work that she makes. And she is transforming people's attitudes about disability just through the work that she makes. She had this piece, images of her, video of her in her underwater wheelchair at the South Bank. And she asked people before they went in to give 3 words what they thought of a wheelchair. So limitation, restriction, sad. And then 3 words when they came out. Freedom, exhilaration, jealousy. Can you imagine people being jealous of you because you use a wheelchair? It was a fantastic transformation of attitudes. It's a brilliant piece, brilliant piece. So for me, it's really important that all those frames, the way in which you think about the work, are in place before you put it out there. Because if you miss something out, it can really make a big difference. And I want to talk about what happens when you get it wrong. Now, I'm clearly not going to sit up here and pick on a theatre company that I think has got it wrong. I think that would be unfair, a theatre or a dance company. So I've chosen an example from the visual arts. And it's not about the artwork being wrong, but it's about the thinking behind the piece not being open enough. And I want to talk about Anish Kapoor. I think he's a big enough artist to take a knock every now and then. And his piece, Leviathan, which was in Paris in 2011. I don't know if anybody got to see it. It was an absolutely stunning installation. It was absolutely beautiful. Huge installation, huge construction, filling the whole of the space. So you could look at it from the outside. There were no barriers to who could look at it from the outside, but you could also go inside the structure. And that's really where the problems started. French legislation is the same as the legislation across Europe, demands that we make things physically accessible for disabled people. Anish Kapoor did not want to make the piece accessible for wheelchair users because he said it would spoil the piece for other people. It was very important for him that you came in through a revolving door. You were almost sucked in to the piece. And the door that he constructed was relatively narrow. It obviously wouldn't take a wheelchair. Now, there were ways. Excuse me. And he was offered the option of having a door that did that in exactly the same way that some people thought, whatever. And he said no, and it went to court. The venue actually took the artist to court in order to try and make the piece accessible. And they won. So everybody goes through the revolving door. Apart from disabled people, you can just see there's a little sign that shows you another door that simply opens and you go through. You do not get the same experience. I've been through both doors. In one door, you are entering an artwork. The frame, the way in which you are taken into that piece supports your understanding of the artist's intention. Through the other door, the wheelchair accessible door, although not just for wheelchair users, it's a door that's for anybody who can't cope with a revolving door. You do not get that frame. You do not get that intention. You just slip in. You feel second class. You're not given the proper entry to the work. But of course, when you've created a work, then you have to bolt on access. You have to bolt on the ways in which other people do it. And I think the world in which I want to have work is where those things are just seamlessly part of what's there, where that consideration is there right from the very beginning. So it's natural, it's integrated, it's an inclusive part of the piece. It's not something that's added on later on. Another place that I worked was at the Bradford Mela, which is a big festival, Asian festival in Bradford, in Yorkshire, near where I live. And again, we got it hideously wrong. And I say we because I was working with them as a consultant at the time. We had laid on loads and loads of accessible elements to the festival, from disabled performers right the way through to, we knew that if we had the performers, we had to also account for, we had to account for audiences, we had parking, we had information stands, we had audio description, we had sign language interpretation. We'd absolutely run through the whole list of everything that you could have. We told all the staff who were running the festival, we did everything. But we didn't tell the security team. When you run an outdoor event in the UK, you have to bring in security guards. They have to staff the perimeter of the event, make sure people don't get in. But they were the first people met. So people drive up and they go, where's the accessible parking? Where's the parking for disabled people? We haven't got any. But we had, but they didn't know. So how could they tell people if they didn't know? They weren't part of our staff team. They were just people we brought in to do a job. Nobody thought to mention it to them. So they didn't know. So we had a huge kind of problem there. We also had problems arise that we didn't think about. At an Asian festival, there's loads of food stalls, loads of places where you can get food to eat. Fantastic. But people weren't very good with the rubbish. They just dropped it on the ground, you know. And there were rubbish bins and people picked up at the end of the day. But a friend of mine went. I use mystery shoppers a lot. If I'm working as a consultant on an event, I want to know how it's gone. I pay disabled people to go and attend and feed back to me. And a friend of mine who uses a wheelchair went, and I said, how long were you there for over the 2 days? He said, 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Why only 10 minutes? He said, well, I arrived in my wheelchair, I got out my car, I started to wheel across the field, and there was rubbish everywhere. And I looked at my hands, and they were covered in curry. They were covered in food, because the litter was on the ground. There was no way to wheel through without getting covered in it. And I was really embarrassed because litter had never before for me been an access issue. It had never before for me been something that I needed to think about. But every event I've done since, and I work on events like Glastonbury or things in Trafalgar Square, things like that, litter is now right at the top of my list. There's always a lesson to learn. There's always something that I've not thought of before that can be brought to my attention. And I need to keep listening. However much I know, there's no way anybody knows anything. The people who know are the people who experience those barriers. So it was a real lesson for me in learning. So I'm going to talk, again, other people who get things wrong. I've just put many unnamed festival events. These, for me, are the key areas where we get things wrong, again and again, when programming diverse work. I think sometimes we get things wrong about where we put work. This glorious shed was a venue where a disabled arts festival was put because it was accessible. So they wanted to choose a place that had good accessibility, where wheelchair users could get in and out. They chose a shed. It wasn't an arts venue. It had no atmosphere. It had no aesthetic quality. It was a shed. We felt we were put in a shed. We had been put in a shed. So where we put work, I think, is really important. Many events I go to, programming of diverse work, there is no audience. The programming of the work has ticked the box. The venue think they've done enough. The programmer thinks they've done enough. The local council thinks they've done enough simply by programming the work. They don't work to get an audience. And at the beginning, you need to work to get an audience. An audience may have those lenses on, those glasses on, thinking the work will be a bit rubbish. We need to work hard to get audiences there. There's a saying, there's no such thing as bad publicity. I don't agree. I think bad publicity is bad publicity. Scrappy publicity, not very good publicity, out of focus publicity. Again, I've seen work put on without the due care and attention given to the materials used to promote that work. How can we tell people it's quality if we don't put quality time and attention into the publicity for the material, for the work itself? Bored, disinterested, unengaged staff, I think, are a huge problem. Not just in their relationships with diverse audiences, but also when they're not engaged with the work itself, when they can't talk about the work itself. I make it a point to go and talk to staff when I go and see work in venues. And first of all, if I talk to them, face to face, that's fine. But if they turn away, I can't lip read them. So I have to say, excuse me, I'm deaf. Could you just look at me? Then I can understand you. And immediately, quite a few people suddenly start talking to me in a completely different way. They're suddenly embarrassed. Suddenly they want to go and get somebody else to deal with me. And then I ask them about the work. Could you tell me about the company? Could you tell me about the performers? Could you tell me about something? And again, quite often they're not articulate about the work. Nobody's really told them enough about the work. They haven't seen the work. How can you explore and explain to an audience? How can you be an intermediary about work that you know nothing about, that you haven't been told about really? And sometimes those attitudes are passed on through our own staff at events. The opposite side for me of bored staff or bored people are people who smile in a fixed way when it's something diverse. I cannot in any way have any other opinion than this is marvellous. We need to talk about the work, not have this instant reaction to, oh my God, I'm going to get something wrong in that way. So obviously I've got a problem with people smiling at me all the time. And charity, as I mentioned before. I think if we start to equate the work with the needs, the economic needs of diverse groups, which I think are very, very real, But if we link it directly to the work, then it starts to say something about the work, which I'm uncomfortable with. So for me, in terms of programming diverse work, in terms of creating diverse work, in terms of looking at diverse work, it's all about what are you looking for? What is it that drives your organisation, your venue, your programme, whatever it is that you do? What are the specific things that you're looking for? If you're looking for representation, then the work that you choose will reflect something very different than if you're looking for technical competence, or if you're looking for artistic freshness and that sense of something new. Quite often, when we book diverse work, we book the first thing we see, because it's the only thing we know. Oh, I've got my wheelchair-using dancer. I don't need to actually look at the variety of wheelchair dance that's out there. So I think it's really important that you know what it is you're looking for. You know the field, you know the range of work that's out there. The work that comes from a community base, the work that comes from professional practitioners, the work that comes from an education background, the work that comes from training and development. There's a whole range of work. It can all be of quality, but you have to know that entire range if you're programming it. You have to know what drives you. What is it that you're looking for? What is it that what's the impact you want to have? Because that will affect what you see and what you choose. You have to know your lenses. What are the lenses through which you view work? You have to be honest about those. You have to own up to and accept your own prejudices and work hard to remove them. You have to know what quality means to you. What do you mean when you use the word quality? And you have to go and find it. And if you can't find it, then I think it's your responsibility to help develop it, to help create it. Who can you work with? Where can you drive standards up so they do meet your quality criteria? I think you need to take great care with your frame, how you frame a piece of work. The context, the way in which you put it, who sees it, who's invited, who gets to... That framing, for me, is all important. And I think it's really important that you share that whole journey with your audience and that you begin to educate your audience in accepting a wider variety of work and to themselves start to look at it with fresh eyes. I think it's really important that you know what it is you're looking at and you actively go out there with a new pair of glasses on, ready to take in things that are, in my opinion, really delicious and not problematic, different, divergent in a negative sense, but truly, I think, are where the most exciting artwork is internationally. Thank you. I think we're going to have time for a couple of questions now. I think the mics are getting organised.
¿Van? Hola, tenemos 5 minutos para preguntas.
Let me just be clear. There's no way I'm going to lip read from up there. So I'm going to come here. Could you come here and tell me the question, please?
En primer lugar, gracias por tu aportación. Yo creo que no tengo una pregunta concreta, una reflexión, porque creo que nos sitúa en el punto donde en nuestro país creo que nos falta muchísima experiencia, como en su momento la Compañía de Teatro de Escocia, que duró, ¿no? Tuvo que evolucionar durante 8 años y hasta 4 años necesitó para poder presentar un espectáculo. Nosotros todavía estamos en ese punto y lo que te agradezco sobre todo es que todo el discurso parte del arte y es donde nosotros todavía tenemos mucho que hacer, porque todavía nuestro discurso parte más de la mediación, de lo asistencial, de lo terapéutico, que tiene todo su valor y no tiene nada que criticar. Pero como sector del arte, de la cultura, del teatro, de la música, el reto está en realmente cómo este tipo de proyectos tienen ese valor artístico, y no solo porque quede bonito, sino porque realmente a través del rigor artístico es como se puede conseguir más valor social. El tema de los públicos también es un reto apasionante, creo, porque realmente todavía falta mucho por hacer para que el público del teatro, de la música, entienda que esto puede formar parte de una programación estándar de cualquier entidad cultural o institución cultural. Pero las instituciones culturales también tienen que hacer el esfuerzo de entender que pueden este tipo de espectáculos formar parte de sus programaciones. No hay madurez en este sentido en nuestro país y ahí tenemos todos los que estamos aquí trabajar. Y también, sobre todo, creo que uno de los retos es medir cuál es el impacto, evaluar estos proyectos, demostrar que esto realmente sirve. Porque emocionarnos, ver realmente las bondades, ver cómo ha ayudado a gente, todo esto todos lo hemos visto, todos lo hemos vivido. Pero al final se queda ahí, en la emoción, en lo bonito, en cómo podemos cambiar las vidas, pero tenemos que demostrarlo. Creo que ahí está también el reto de cómo evaluamos, cómo aplicamos metodologías de medición para ver cuál es el retorno social de todos estos proyectos. Más fuerte sea esa parte, más podremos convencer a nuestras administraciones, a nuestras instituciones, en que esto crea valor social. Porque si no, solo felicitarnos de las bondades, al final es un punto de partida en el cual estamos, es fantástico, pero hay que poder demostrarlo. Y creo que tu aportación o tu ponencia nos da muchas ideas en las cuales nos podemos inspirar. Gracias.
Thank you. I mean, I completely agree. I think sometimes if we don't frame a piece properly, if we show a piece to the wrong audience at the wrong time, in the wrong way, the piece can be good, but the damage can be immense. And actually, I've seen work that is great for one context, plucked out and put in another context, and everybody just goes, what? It just doesn't work and actually can do more damage. And then that sets us back. It takes a long time. The journey takes a long time. But if we take one step forward and then take 3 steps backwards, we're never going to get anywhere. So we, I think, within the arts sector, need to really hold on to our truths and what we believe about our work and what we believe about artistic quality and bring that through the work. I think you're right, that therapeutic work, work that's around mediation, work that's around resolution, work that's around self-esteem, it's all fantastic. It doesn't mean it's all suitable for mainstream artistic platforms. You know, everything has its place. And I think it's really important to get the place right, because if we don't, we do damage in the minds of the audience. We are giving audiences those glasses that say this work is not good enough. And we are reinforcing the very problem that we want to solve.
Hola, buenos días.
Yeah. I have to flick back and forth with various bits of equipment. Yeah.
Te he estado escuchando y me ha encantado. Has dicho muchísimas cosas que son ciertas y tengo también que estar de acuerdo con la compañera que ha hablado anteriormente, pero hay una sola cosa en la que no estoy de acuerdo. Y es que en este país, desde hace muchos años, llevan trabajando muchas compañías, tanto de danza como de teatro, en el ámbito profesional, no terapéutico. Sí que es cierto que es muy difícil sacar ese trabajo adelante, sí que es cierto que son mucho más difíciles las barreras mentales que las físicas, sí que es cierto que llamar a una puerta y encontrarse con esa cara de bostezo que tú has mostrado ahí es lo más frecuente, pero para eso estamos luchando. Creo que todas o casi todas las compañías que de estas características trabajamos en este país. Yo no sé si aquí en la sala hay alguien más que trabaja en este ámbito, conocidos míos sé que hay alguno, pero sí que estamos trabajando en ello y de hecho se ha creado una Federación Nacional de Arte y Discapacidad para conseguir esos objetivos que tú has marcado. Y hay una cosa que me ha encantado que has dicho y creo que es un objetivo de esta federación y como aquí se podría definir en un término más de marketing, sería hacer de la discapacidad una marca de calidad. Es decir, que todo el mundo quiera tener un discapacitado en su casa, por decirlo burdamente, ¿no? Sí que hace falta también concienciar al público, a la gente que ve este tipo de espectáculos, que lo que se da encima del escenario muchas veces puede que no sea la mayor calidad técnica, pero que llega al corazón, eso lo puedo asegurar. Nada más que eso, gracias.
Yeah. I think absolutely. I think it's then about where do you place the work that doesn't have the technical expertise but does have the emotional impact. And I think we can place that work in a range of places. It's why I love Janice Parker's work so much. If you'd have put any of her dancers on a main stage on their own with lights and all the technical thing, you would have lost their beauty. You wouldn't have been able to see it. So we have to have the right construct around the work in order to be able to appreciate it. But sometimes when we're making work, we have in our heads that the bigger it is, the better it is. The more technical it is, the better it is. We fall into that trap too, rather than thinking about what serves this piece of art best. For this particular piece, what serves it best? And I know my husband runs a theatre company, and he's always saying the problem is we have to design the publicity before we design the show. So we have to imagine what it will be, and we create the marketing materials, and then we create the show to match the marketing, rather than create the show that it needs to be. And so sometimes we have tensions around that too. But, art is a playground. It's a place to play. It's about giving ourselves that greater freedom to really honour and serve the work, and to really honour and serve the needs of diverse makers of work, so that we can better change the minds of audiences. I have no doubt that we can. I have absolutely no doubt that we can. I'm convinced that the work is far more interesting than anything else. When I go and see work that isn't by diverse makers, I'm actually bored now. It doesn't feed me in the same way. And I don't think I'm unique. I think there's a whole generation of people who like to see difference, who like a different way of viewing the world presented to them.
Gracias. Hemos terminado aquí. Os agradecería que no salgáis de la sala si no es imprescindible, porque pasamos al siguiente ponente para no acumular mucho retraso, ¿vale? Gracias, Jo.